in the flyer, will Congress's recently passed Caesar bill with U.S. sanctions put an end to President Assad's tyranny and the violence in Syria. And we are honored today to have as our guest speakers Congressman Eliot Engel, Chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and he is currently in Washington, D.C., and he is available now by telephone. And we have as a co-speaker Mr. Saed Moujtahed, who is an electrical engineer and founder of Apex, but also he is the president of the Syrian Institute for Progress. I am Serge Tomasian, the chairman of the programs and past chairman of the council, and I will serve as the moderator. And I just want to advise everyone, we have a very large audience out there across this country. We're pleased to have you. The World Affairs Council of Orange County has been putting on programs 2 to 3 per month on timely and topics. And we believe the topic of Syria and the Caesar bill and what was the genesis of the Caesar bill are important topics that should be disclosed and informed to our audience out there. So I think we'll start, I'll be the moderator today. I think we'll start with the general statement, starting with Congressman Engel about the genesis, what brought about the Caesar bill, and then we'll go to Saed. Congressman, please.
Well, thank you. Let me first of all congratulate you and thank you for your interest in world affairs, and particularly in what's going on in Syria. So I'm very delighted to be able to speak with you. Sort of. We had little technical difficulties before. I now currently serve as the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Congress and the U.S. House of Representatives. For 6 years, I was ranking member, and one of Orange County's sons was the chairman. That was Ed Royce. And when Ed retired, I became the chairman. I took over his spot. Even though we are in different political parties, we work together and work closely together. And I always say that foreign policy needs to be bipartisan. And we have to make sure that politics stops at the water's edge, and that's really, I think, important for our nations to understand that. So I want to thank the World Affairs Council of Orange County for hosting this event and for the invitation. I am always grateful to talk about foreign affairs work we're doing in Congress. And this particular topic, the ongoing tragedy in Syria, is one that's really especially close to my heart and an area that I focused on for many, many, many years. I greatly appreciate Saed Moujtahed's tireless work advocating for Syria and for the Syrian American community. He is one of my good friends, one of my best friends, and came to me, was the first one many, many years ago who came to me to tell me what his experience is, has been, in terms of what's been going on in Syria, how many innocent people have died, how terrible Assad is, a butcher of his own people. And Saed and I have worked closely on this for many, many years, and I want to say hello to him especially. We're lucky to have him working with us on this cause. His efforts have just been hugely impactful for so many people. So let me just say, it's hard to believe that it's been almost 10 years since the Syrian civil war began. We thought that the ending would be different. When I think of the 12 million people who have lost their homes, the nearly 500,000 lives lost, including more than 60,000 children, all at the hands of the Assad regime, and Assad's military, which is aided by Russia and Iran, shows no sign of stopping its brutal assault on its own people. The indiscriminate attacks on neighborhoods and civilian infrastructure throughout northwest Syria go on, still going on. As we gather today, the Syrian regime continues to wreak tremendous violence on civilian populations, targeting hospitals, clinics, schools, and other sites protected under international law. Meanwhile, an unprecedented number of refugees remain stranded in open fields without proper shelter or regular access to emergency supplies. This is all the more tragic as the coronavirus spreads in areas where proper medical services are impossible to deliver and NGOs struggle to provide life-saving aid. In honor of Caesar, the courageous Syrian regime photographer who smuggled images shined a light on some of the Assad regime's worst crimes, I introduced and saw through to passage my bipartisan bill, the Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act, to crack down on the enablers of Assad. I remember when the first time we met him, he had his face covered with masks. You know, in those days, nobody had masks, so it looked very, very strange indeed. But he was afraid, and rightfully so, that the Assad's henchmen would track him down and do harm to him. And so he had the mask on, and we got to know him. He got to be our friends, and we had many discussions with him afterwards. Now, when we talk about Assad, his enablers, that includes Russia, it includes Moscow, it includes Tehran or Iran, and it includes anyone else who wants to serve as a lifeline for this brutal regime. It also gives the administration more tools to push for a political solution by imposing sanctions on anyone who does business with or provides funding to the Syrian regime. The bill includes provisions to ensure that non-governmental organizations providing assistance to Syria are not inadvertently caught by sanctions, except in the case of a designated terrorist. Delivery of aid is vital, and the Syrian people should not suffer further and should not continue to have deprivation because of the actions of their violent government. The Caesar Act also imposes sanctions on anyone providing aircraft or spare parts to the Syrian regime. The Syrian Air Force has been behind many of the regime's worst international law violations, from the 2017 chemical weapons attacks to the deliberate targeting of civilians in schools and civilians in hospitals. I can think of anything more disgraceful than that. This bill is about more than pressuring the regime. It also gives the Syrian government an off-ramp. If Assad chooses to refrain from bombarding his own people, if he frees political prisoners and allows refugees to return home safely and with dignity, these sanctions can be suspended in the short term. This is not about punishment. This is about bringing the regime to the table. We've already seen the administration announce the first waves of sanctions under my bill, and I'm working hard to make sure the pressure doesn't stop and that we continue cracking down on Assad and his supporters. I will continue to urge the administration to implement Caesar with an eye toward pushing the regime to the negotiating table to bring about a better future for all Syrians. This is one of the worst humanitarian disasters of our time and deserves a robust response from our policymakers. It is hard for me to believe that so many years have passed since the Caesar bill came forward, and when we hoped that there would be an Arab Spring, that certain countries, including Syria, would change and be better for its people, what we wound up getting out of that was worse treatment for the Syrian people. And children and mothers and grandmothers and people just being killed and indiscriminately. It's just the world sort of stands by and watch. We cannot obviously afford to do that. So we need to keep, I'm grateful to you for talking about this, and I'm grateful to you for letting others know that this is not something that we're going to ever walk away from. I've been doing work involving Syria for a long, long time. The Syria Accountability Act was my my bill. It's more than 10 years ago. So I wanted to also say that this has been bipartisan up and down the line, because none of us want to see tragedies, civilians, innocent people be caught behind the lines, which is really what's happened. The Syrian people have suffered enough, and enough is enough. So I'm grateful to you for doing this. Try to answer a few of your questions, and if there's any statements that any of you would like to make or any suggestions you might have, I'm all ears. Please let me know. And again, I want to thank my friend Saeed. Without him, believe me, this would not have been possible. I know a lot about Syria because I've done a lot of work in Syria. I thought I knew a lot, but when I got to know Saeed and got to know him well, I realized how much more he knows than I know and than everybody else knows. He just is it breaks his heart to see the Syrian people suffer like this. And so, again, Saeed, thank you for all you've done, all the lives you saved, and we're going to keep on pushing, and we're not going to stop until the Syrian people are free once again, and then we're moved from the shackles of their phony leadership, and can give a good life once again to the Syrian people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. You mentioned it's a bipartisan bill. As well, it was signed by the president and came into effect June of this year. Saeed.
Yes. And by the way, we acted no differently with President Trump than we acted with President Obama. Because again, as I said before, this is not a partisan bill. This is bipartisan, and it should be.
Washington supported this. Saeed, tell the people listening how it started, who these are, and what did he see out there that motivated him and in turn motivated you and the congressman to pass this bill. You're on mute, Saeed, you're on mute, please. You're still on mute. There you go, Saeed. Go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank the World Affairs Council for hosting this important milestone legislation that was truly the most important success for the last 10 years for the Syrian people. I also like to thank you very much, Serge, for taking the time in hosting this and approving it as well. And I like to thank all the members who took time to listen to us and has interest in this. And I encourage you all to support the World Affairs Council. It's a great informative organization. Nevertheless, I am so honored to be with Chairman Eliot Engel, who I truly consider him the champion for human rights. Many people do not know about something so important that he accomplished in his career, where he saved millions of people. It's during the Albanian genocide, where he personally went to President Clinton and demanded that the US will to push the NATO to get involved, and that's really what happened. And Kosovo was saved. And by the way, since 2005, they honored him with the street under his name. So having said that, you know, the Syrian revolution started in 2011, and the atrocity that the Syrian bear is just unbelievable. So I was very active in Congress. At that time was Chairman Royce in 2013. And of course, Congressman Eliot was the co-chair. And, you know, I was just lobbying to do something, that Congress got to do something about Syria in the House to put the pressure on the administration. So make the story short, in 2014, a general who defected, I'm not sure about his true ranking, but someone who was responsible to take a photo of over 3,000 detainees who were to death. And those photos made it here to the US and was hosted also for a hearing in Congress. And the chairman, Eliot Engel, back in 2005, started the legislation for Syria accountability. I do not recall the exact name at that time because it kept changing as time passes. And then the first time was passed in 2016. And then given it the name of Caesar as an honor to that gentleman who risked his life to smuggle the chip that has over 3,000 pictures on it, which, by the way, they were displayed at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I believe in around 2015-16. So it took several years to get it past the Senate. It passes the first time in the House 2016, went to the Senate, got stuck. Then the following year, they have to vote again. Finally, in 2019, it took that long to lobby both senior member or ranking member of the Senate, Senator Risch, who's head of the foreign relations in the Senate, and Senator McConnell, that finally everybody agreed to put it into the, to attach it actually to the National Defense Bill, which it happened, I believe, in September 17th, which was a historic day, and then was signed a short few days after by the president, so became into law. And then 6 months later to get into effect, which really became into effect June 17th of this year. One thing I would like to point out, as the chairman said, this is not a bill to penalize the regime, rather than to encourage them to go into negotiation and get a closure for the Syrian people. So finally, after 10 years of destruction, where the Assad regime destroyed 2/3 of Syria, of total infrastructure, close to actually over 2/3 of the Syrian population is displaced, almost no hospital standing, no schools whatsoever. So it is really what the Syrian people have seen, never seen in our modern history at all. That one thing I want to add is that this bill is not only against Assad, but also against the Russian and the Iranian who's backing up Assad. So the bill called on stopping all the bombing of civilians and so forth. I hope I answered what you're looking for, Serge. Unless I missed something, please state it. I'm not hearing you. Let me just see. I'm not hearing.
There have been literally hundreds of thousands of people killed in the intervening years and millions of Syrians displaced because of this war that's been going on there. The humanitarian crisis is well known. Now, Congressman, tell us who is being targeted. I think Saed touched on it. Who is being targeted with these sanctions, and how are they going to work in terms of either bringing Assad to the negotiating table or perhaps having him step down, which I think is a more remote possibility. But what are the sanctions? What are the sanctions, and what are their intentions?
Well, the sanctions are against the people who are aiding and abetting the regime. It's to get them, as I said before, and Said repeated it, to change their behavior. We're not concentrating on bringing them to justice, although they have to be brought to justice. But right now, we just want the carnage to stop, the killing of children and women, and it's just horrific. And that's what we really want to emphasize, which is why this is a little bit different than most bills you'll see. It's also bipartisan, which I think is very, very important to keep it that way. You know, when Caesar, that's not his real name. He was one of the official photographers for the regime, and I took pictures of all these people who looked like skin and bones. It was like pictures, like Saeed said, it was like pictures right out of the Holocaust, right out of Europe in the 1940s. You saw the dead bodies, skin and bones, and it just sickens you to see human beings being treated that way. And so we want to just keep the pressure going. Now the aggravating thing is, Assad, his father was the honcho, the big honcho in Syria. When he died, this guy took over, and the West had hoped that because he had been educated in the West, I think he was a dentist, they felt that there would be perhaps more humanitarian feeling in the regime, but it turned out not to be, that he was just like his father in terms of killing his own people. And what's so aggravating is that while hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians were killed after years and years and years of fighting, Assad comes back into Syria, and he tries to make himself be like a hero. He's not a hero; he's a murderer. But the fact that he was able to still be around, to still stay alive while innocent children are being killed, is just disgraceful, and disgraceful behavior of so many of the other countries, like we mentioned Russia and Iran. Just absolutely disgusting. That they would still be around, aiding and abetting these people who have murdered people, and just disgraceful. So we want we want the world to know that this is still going on. We hoped that at some point maybe it would change, but it's still going on. Still, women and children and people are being murdered. The world cannot afford to turn its head. So we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep pushing it. We're going to keep fighting for it, and hopefully there'll be some good news, because there hasn't been very much over the past decade in Syria. The bill Saeed was referred to as a Syria Accountability Act, which I also sponsored back in 2003, and we also did that on a bipartisan basis. We want to do international events. International affairs is best when it's bipartisan. We're Americans, and we all share the feeling of what the United States stands for, the freedoms that we're so used to, and that the people in countries like Syria not only don't get those freedoms, but they get killed instead. So we're going to keep going at it, but it's very, 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 very aggravating, to say the least.
Congressman and Saeed, the bill is to sanction those entities, those countries that are supporting Assad in committing crimes that he's committing. And I understand the sanctions are focused on entities that are doing business with the regime, its military, and the intelligence agencies. What do you know about that side in terms of who's being sanctioned, and what impact will that have on the civilians in Syria?
Well,
Either Saeed or Congressman, either one.
But the sanction goes way beyond what you just mentioned.
I think we're...
Financial assistance.
You're breaking up a little bit, Saeed.
I don't know.
You were just breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure if it's the speaker or your connection.
Yeah, and I can't hear anything.
Congressman, maybe while he...
I didn't hear.
Do you
I'm
want
sorry,
to address...
say it again?
If you like to address who's being specifically sanctioned with this bill, and what's going to be the impact on the people in Syria? I know it was tailored to focus in on the military, the intelligence agencies, and the regime of Assad. But what is going to be the impact, if any, on the civilians there? I mean, that's been some of the discourse.
Well, we're the biggest collaborators, the ones who are essentially responsible for the carnage and for perpetuating it. Those are the people who are targeted and sanctioned as a result. Of course, if you have a regime like Assad's regime, which is or like a leader, I wouldn't call him a leader. It's certainly not a leader, but he will try to block it at every turn. We just have to make sure that those people who are responsible for the wanton killing of so many hundreds of thousands of people are brought to justice. So it's the collaborators. It's before, when regimes do horrible things, they can't do them by themselves. They have unfortunately collaborators and people who have murdered innocents, and so we are looking as well to bring them up ultimately on charges as well. So that's what we're trying to do as well. Now, it passed the House and the Senate, signed by the president, but it's a very difficult thing to implement, particularly when you have countries like Iran and Russia, who are have disgraceful human rights records and are making it more and more difficult to bring people to justice who need to be brought to justice.
Saed, you're on mute now, Saed, but we got you back there while we had you. If you could just tell us again, in terms of the impact that the sanctions are going to have, in terms of what's the desired impact, and what's going to be the impact. I mean, there's been some discussion about civilians in Syria are going to suffer, and certainly what's happened in Lebanon recently will reverberate to some extent in Syria. What's your perception of the impact these sanctions are going to have on the general population, and how is it tailored to focus in on the Assad regime? Did we lose you, Syed?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Well, the Syrian people has been suffering for 10 years. So the Caesar's impact actually, I don't believe has much impact more than what they have living under the condition of bombardment from barrel bomb, etc., from the air, from the Russian, from all the goods that's not available to the public, the prices skyrocketing in prices, etc. The bill actually should help the Syrian people on the long term to get a closure, because it seems that Assad determined that he's ready to destroy the whole country as long as he can, hold on to his seat. Now, I think the success of the sanction is truly dependent upon the administration to execute the sanction in its full capacity. Once they start deviating from that and giving exemption, the international community will lose faith in the bill. And that's really dangerous and alerting, because we have seen this to start happening in the northeast of Syria. So I know that the chairman, as he mentioned earlier, he is working hard to make sure that this bill will be implemented in full. And I'm grateful to him that I understand that a hearing possibly is going to take place in December. Of course, part of it will be, to question such an issue. But in all capacity, I think the bill, if the administration executed in its own text, it will save a lot of life. It will bring stability to Syria, and that by itself, it's a stability to the region.
So you mentioned the Northeast, and so one of the questions that's come up is, what impact will these sanctions have on the Kurds in the north? Are they being affected? Are they being bound by these sanctions, or is the focus solely on the Assad regime and to bring him to the negotiating table, or to bring the Russians perhaps to the negotiating table? What is your view on that, Congressman, in terms of its impact on the Kurds and what is going on in the Northeast, as referred to by Saed?
Well, yeah. Well, I think that we need to be very careful of this bill or this law or any other law of having a negative impact on the Kurds. I was very much opposed to when the president said that the United States was going to get out of the region, and we saw immediately they moved on the Kurds, and because of the cry and the response and the firmness that we all took, the administration backed off, which was the right thing to do, and so I don't believe this will affect the Kurds in a negative way. But you know, the Middle East is very volatile, and has one thing happens, and before you know it, it spreads like wildfire. So it's something we need to be very careful about. I think that my phone is about ready to die. I keep hearing beeps, and so if you suddenly don't hear me, it isn't because I hung up on you. It's because the phone can.
Let me ask.
I don't know if you can still hear me.
We can, Congressman. Please stay on as long as you can. We'd appreciate that. Syed, someone is asking, look, Syria, I mean, how many players have intervened in Syria? You have Turkey, you have Iran, you have Russia, you have Israel periodically bombing Syria. The U.S. is there. Some of the European countries are there. Someone's asking the question, is it possible to live in peace in Syria? Is it going to be possible after this country has been demolished to restore the country of Syria? What are your thoughts on that, Saeed?
Well, if anything we need to judge is we need to go back to history. Syria, with the capital of Damascus, is the oldest inhabited city on earth. Syria have seen thousands of invaders, from the Mongolian to the Roman, etc. Always survived. So 10 years of destruction, which I fully agree with you, Syria becoming a proxy war to the Western world, whether Russia, you know, on the East, Iran, Europe, the US, even regional country, everybody fighting each other on the land of Syria and on the expense of the Syrian people. As a Syrian American, I'm very hopeful because I believe in the Syrian determination, and I believe in the Syrian heritage. What makes Syria so strong throughout the history is its diversity. And the Syrian people, I believe, has the largest different ethnicity group and religious background that lived in harmony and peace and cooperation to its fullest degree for thousands of years. That's what we have, that's our equity, and that's what we need to build upon. If we look at it on the short terms, it's terrifying. And that's why we are all determined to build Syria for all Syrians, regardless of their ethnicity or religious background. We are Syrian first and Syrian at last.
Thank you, Syed. Congressman, the Syrian foreign minister, in response to the Caesar bill and to the imposed sanctions, said, quote, "With the assistance of friends and allies, we'll survive." What's your response to that in terms of what's the likelihood of him getting the support that he needs to survive these sanctions?
You're talking about the Assad. He's talking about the Assad regime. Am I correct? That's what.
Right. The Syrian foreign minister,
Yeah.
when he was criticizing the bill, he says, look, this is going to, several quotes he gave. It's going to starve the people. But Syria will cope with the assistance of friends and allies. I assume he means Iran, Russia, maybe China. What's your thoughts in terms, are they going to support him despite his horrendous background in terms of the his human rights violations, the tortures?
I certainly hope not, and it's a disgrace if they do. Look, you know, the whole point is to, I think, is to get this regime. This regime should not have any right to rule Syria in any way, shape, or form. They are killers of their own people. They are killers of children and old people and women and old men, and they just have some nerve to try to play a game where they are trying to look patriotic. They're the trouble. It isn't the other states as the trouble. They're the trouble, and if other states help them, then they should pay the same penalty that ultimately the butchers, Assad and his ilk, have gotten and have done in Syria. So, you know, you can't. We can't say. You know, it's true that Syria has been in the center of a lot of things, but you know, it isn't. It's so different in terms of the reasons for it. Israel feels very strongly that if they were to pull back, Iran would take over the skies over Syria, and I don't think the Syrian people want that, and I don't think anybody really wants it except Assad and the Iranian regime. And the United States is watching it because we cannot afford, with all the difficulties we've had in the Middle East in these past few years since these wars. We don't want to give the Iranians or the Russians or the Assad regime a tacit victory. So I think we have to be careful. We want war to stop, but when the war stops, we don't want Assad and his group to be in charge. They are butchers, and they're people.
Syed, let me ask you a question from one of the audience members. Can you hear me, Syed?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, I think this question is best for you to answer because it's your country, originally your country. You understand the people there, you understand the culture. But to our audience, this is the question. I think it's an idea, it's a thought in a lot of people's minds, but the question is, please explain Assad's motivation in destroying his country, in killing hundreds of thousands of people, his own citizens. What does he gain? What is his thinking that could possibly justify that type of mass murder and torture of men, women, and children? What is the thinking that you believe, and others believe with your group, that would be motivating this?
Well, I think we have seen several personalities throughout history with similar way of eliminating and mass murder, from Hitler to Stalin, etc. But what surprised me is that Assad supposed to be westernized, educated, and yet we see him killing his own people. In my own judgment, and knowing him actually, and knowing his late brother, who I went to school with, Basil, who got killed in car accident, to know them, the father, Hafiz Assad, he took the position and control of Syria through military coup. And over the years, he transformed Syria into, into a ranch. So the Syrian people are nothing but a working class for him. and over 40 years, it started getting into their cycle that every Syrian owed it to the Assad family for their lives. Also, he's got the group around him, which was led by his late mother, that pushed him to go into a military action against the uprising that started all peacefully. And then he was also pushed by Iran, very much influenced by Iran, and later by the Russian. And then gradually you have the regional countries, especially the Gulf countries, that start also playing their own game there. So it becomes either me or them. And he got so much involved in killing that to him, he already paid the price. He needs to keep killing till he makes sure that he controls the country back again. But he just lost it in terms of natural human being to think about. I mean, he's got a family and kids, but I guess, you know, we have seen those samples throughout history. It's unfortunate what's happening, but really that's the least I can tell you. And that's why we
and let's also, Saeed, let's also remember that that the original uprising, this last uprising in Syria, was part of what was then called the Arab Spring, when we thought that the governments that were totalitarian, like the Assad regime, in other countries in the Middle East, would fall by the wayside, and democracy would begin to flourish. Instead, we had a turnaround, a reversal, where the whole point of people's wishes and hopes that they could live in a free and democratic country were overtaken and destroyed by people like Assad, who was determined to stay in power no matter how many people he killed. For him, the important thing was not saving lives; it was in clinging to power, saving his regime. And so it's particularly galling, as I said before, that after all these years of people being killed, that Assad would come back into Syria, claim victory, and claim to be the leader again. And listen, there are others coming down the line that would want to be the leaders who were as bad as him and maybe even worse. So we had high hopes with the Arab Spring. Unfortunately, those hopes turned to disaster, particularly in Syria.
Let me ask you this question.
So I'm gonna run off the line because I have to go to a couple of events. But thank you for your concern, and thank you for focusing everyone's attention on this bill. We still have Saeed and I talk a lot, and we both have high hopes for the future of Syria. We both have high hopes, and let me also say that the great Syrian American community, the diaspora, has done marvelous work. I've worked very closely with them during these years to try to bring freedom back to Syria, and I take my hat off to brave Syrian Americans who aren't afraid to speak out. And of course, as I said before, when I started, Saeed has just been wonderful. He's been the person, as far as I'm concerned, who has taken this movement and pushed it to success. We still have a lot more success to do. We still have more things to do, but none of this would have been done without Saeed. So I'm happy to call him my friend. I'm happy to have worked with him, and he will tell you, and I will tell you, we're not stopping now. We're going to continue. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for listening, and it's been I can't say a pleasure to discuss these things, but it's been good that we are making people aware of what went on in Syria and what will continue to go on if the United States doesn't take an active role in preventing it. So thank you. And
Congressman, the World Affairs Council of Orange County thanks you for taking the time from your busy schedule in Washington to address this important topic and to speak to our membership across the country with the World Affairs Councils of America. So thank you very much, Congressman.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Let me ask Saeed,
Yeah.
somebody on the line, and I know you've worked very closely with the congressmen and others in Washington. You and Suzanne have worked very closely with your organization to get this bill passed and to address the humanitarian issues that have been violated in Syria by the regime. One of the questions that's being asked is, do you believe at the end of the day that sanctions will either bring the Assad regime down or bring them to the negotiating table? And I believe there's a UN resolution that the Russians sponsored that discusses, and you might know the resolution, I've made a note here, where it's on the table whether or not he would, it doesn't call for his removal, but it's on the table whether, it's left open whether or not he would leave. So what's your anticipation of the impact of these sanctions and where it's going to end up in terms of the Assad regime status?
Well, in my own judgment, being only a month and a half into the sanction, we haven't seen really the major part of the sanction been implemented yet. And that's why earlier I said the bill will be successful upon the administration, how they are going to implement it in full, which I'm really hoping. For instance, the Syrian National Bank is under the sanction. This, we have not seen it happening yet. So once the sanctions are implemented in full, not only on Assad, but also on the Russian and the Iranian, I truly believe that the regime will start deteriorating from the inside, which we have seen actually few months before even Caesars become into an effect, where the Syrian pound devaluated from 550 to the dollar, went all the way to 3,000 to the dollar. So, and that's before even it was implemented. I honestly believe that there are many players, as you suggested earlier, in Syria. And I think we need the
By the
Western...
way, I left out Hezbollah. So Lebanon through Hezbollah is also involved.
Yeah, of course. They are actually one of the worst that the Syrian people, that they inflicted killing and torture on the Syrian people. But I didn't mention them because those are part of the Iranians. So whenever I say Iran, it means Hezbollah, means many other factions, including factions that came from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, the Kurds from Iranian militia. All of those groups and militia are under the Iranian. So once we implement Caesar, I think it's going to be a true tool for starting to put closure and to the end of the misery for the life of the Syrian. However, this requires an honest, true will from the international community, and especially Europe and the United States. A lot of people, we hear, oh, well, you know, the US doesn't have a true policy. You know, for somebody who's working on Syria very closely in Washington, DC for the last almost 10 years, we are the biggest democracy in the world. We are the most powerful. We lead the world. For a country like us, where the Middle East is so essential to the stability of the world, and we come and we say we don't have a policy, with all due respect, it's a joke. What I am afraid is that we have a policy that is not out in the open. And what we are witnessing is just the preparation to come to the point where the policy will surface. But that 10 years, the Syrian people are paying very heavy price. I think the Syrian, what they have witnessed truly, there is nothing in history like it, nothing. I mean, you have over 9 million refugees.
So that's one of the issues that was in the news perhaps a couple of years ago about the refugee refugee issue in Europe, the people's fleeing the violence in Syria. And so that had repercussions, of course. So what's been going on in Syria has had worldwide repercussions. But the resolution I was referring to is the Russian-supported UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which is Russian-backed. And I'm not sure, is it a sincere resolution to try to bring peace to Syria, where they leave open the ultimate fate of Assad, or is it some cover for the Russians in terms of their involvement, their military involvement, and their rather harsh military involvement, brutal in Syria? If you have any thoughts on that, Saed.
Of course, you know, Russia could have brought peace to Syria since 2015 when they entered Syria. But what they chose is to be with the dictator, not with the Syrian people. They brought their most sophisticated weapon that they tried it over the Syrian land and the Syrian people, killing children and women and elderly. You know, we have another organization, humanitarian, we bring burned children. And the Shriners Hospital were telling me they've never seen those conditions of burning before. And that's because of the new weapon that Russia is doing. What I think Russia is doing is trying to play game to against the Caesar's bill to somehow go around it. But they could have forced Assad out of power for the last 5 years. And by the way, there was a report surfaced 3 days ago that the Russians were trying a new agent of poisoning on a Syrian detainees under Assad regime. I mean, look how cruel they are.
So let me ask you this side, because I think the question that's, I'm not saying it's justification, but one of the things that people mention that if these sanctions, along with worldwide pressure, the Assad regime is brought down, what is the alternative in Syria? What do you envision? What is your organization and others affiliated with your organization see the future of Syria in the event that Assad is overthrown or he, I say disappears, but is no longer there? What do you see as the alternative for a peaceful Syria?
Well, the alternative is democracy. To have Syria ruled by rule of law, enjoying the same political system as we enjoy here in the United States, where every Syrian, regardless of their origin or belief, has equal right, similar to what Syria was back in the 50s, where Syria majority Sunni led by a Christian prime minister who got elected 3 times, Bashar al-Khoury. And by the way, Bashar al-Khoury he is a founding member of the UN. This is the Syria that was then, and this is the Syria that we want to bring in today.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I'm gonna invite our chairman, Nora Valenzuela, to say a few words. But I just want to say this is such an emotional, passionate issue about the travesty that has been going on in Syria. And it's not on the radar as it was a few years ago, but maybe the sanctions will bring it back. Are there any just closing thoughts you want to bring about in terms of I mean, it's your home country, and obviously you probably know you have family or friends or colleagues that have been impacted by what's gone on there. Is there any just final word you'd like to say on behalf of your organization and yourself about what this bill means to the people of Syria?
Well, I really hope that all Syrians do know and recognize their misery was not the Caesar's bill, was Assad and his cronies that been bombarding them for 10 years. This bill is really to put a closure, to expedite the solution for Syria. And I'm really very happy and proud of also the Syrian American organization and Syrian activists and the Syrian American diaspora at large, that we all work together to make this historical bill happening and go through the Senate and now become into a law. And I really thank you so much, Serge, and for your great, fine organizations, and to all the listeners for their interest in Syria. And God willing, we'll have a call not too far from now where we can talk about the liberation of Syria and to have the first real democratic country in the Middle East.
Thank you, Syed.
Thank
I'll
you.
turn it over to Nora, please.
Thank you, Serge.
You've got mail.
I believe Serge email is on, correct?
I'll mute it. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much, Saeed, and also Congressman, for joining us. The event today was most informative in terms of matters of world affairs, especially on a nonpartisan platform. We thank all of our guests, all of our interns and volunteers for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you at our September event. Thank you, everyone, and have a safe afternoon.
Thank you.